Morning to everybody. So, did you actually get a load of that last part of the gospel? When you hold a lunch or dinner, do not invite your friends or brothers or relatives or wealthy neighbors. Okay, that part might be relatively easy. If you're like me, you don't have a lot of friends, so not much to miss out on there. But rather, when you hold a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. Could you imagine what it would look like if we took that seriously? I want you to stop and think. Who are the lame, the blind, the crippled in today's world? It would be the homeless, the chronically unemployed, maybe the addicts of our world. Now, imagine what it would imply for you to say, come on into my house. Would it even be recommendable? Do you think, did Jesus really mean what he was saying? Come into my home, have a nice meal. First of all, the village association might have something to say about it. Certainly your neighbors, if they saw it happen on more than one occasion, would be saying, what's going on here? And you would have some explaining to do. Certainly if you live anywhere around here. I mean, I live in Rye, and I know if we did that in Rye, I assure you, we would be getting phone calls. So the question is again, did Jesus really mean that? Well, I think, first of all, there is a more comfortable way that we can interpret this gospel, and it is totally valid and totally legitimate, and I think Jesus also meant this when he said it. Because we can ask ourselves, okay, what is this banquet? Well, the banquet that Jesus talks about all the time is the Mass. In the Mass, it is the banquet in which God invites us. Remember that the sense of a meal, when we share a meal, we're entering into a kind of communion. You're allowing people into your inner circle and creating kind of a bond and saying, you belong here. So that was the Old Testament, and really throughout the world, culturally, that's always been kind of a thing. So in the Eucharistic banquet, Christ is saying, you belong here. Everybody is invited. It doesn't matter really, race, color, religion, social class, none of that. Your language, none of that matters. All are invited to the Mass. Now, you might want to be in the state of grace before you receive communion. You might want to be Catholic before you receive communion. But even if you're not, you're at least still invited to participate in the Mass. And that is a totally legitimate interpretation, and it is an important interpretation, and I think Jesus had it in mind when he said it. But is that the only thing he had in mind? Because frankly speaking, I think that still leaves us feeling very comfortable. Because the Mass is nice and everybody's invited and you're all welcome to our church, but I don't have to do anything. Does that really change us? Does that get us out of our comfort zone? The fact that somebody from a different neighborhood could walk into the doors of St. Mary and they would be welcome to Mass, even if they, for whatever reason, didn't seem like they fit in. And I think Jesus wants to challenge us. I think he frankly kind of meant what he said when he said, when you have a meal, invite the homeless, invite the people that are on the outskirts, the fringes. So again, the question is, what would that look like for you and me? Because I don't honestly think, frankly, it wouldn't even be recommendable for most of us at least, to invite some of these homeless, or to invite addicts, or to invite unknown elements into our neighborhood, into our home. If you have, children, for example, or just even simply your possessions, there are real factors to take into consideration. Well, yesterday I was talking to a group of men that I know, some of the local Regnum Christi men. They have their little weekly reflection called an Encounter with Christ. And one of them gave an example of a friend who lives not too far from here. I think he lives in Darien, if I'm not mistaken. And what does this guy do? Well, this guy works downtown. He takes a train downtown and, has his normal job. But at least once a month or a couple times a month, he will go walking down the street, and kind of like the first homeless person that he sees, he will invite them personally and say, let's go have lunch. He's not bringing them to the Ritz-Carlton or anything, it's Kentucky Fried Chicken or something, but he says, let's go have lunch. And he will bring them in, talk to them, get to know their name, we've got an hour to play with here, get to know their story. And these people can smell and be totally unpleasant and maybe, whatever. And he says, what do you want to order? Sits down with them one-on-one and shows them dignity. That is a very doable example for a lot of the people in the church, at least if you're a young, robust man. Now, this guy happens to be, he's not particularly huge or anything. He's tall, he's like 6'3", and he hikes, so he's a fairly athletic fellow. He can do that. I wouldn't recommend it necessarily to all the ladies here in the church, but that is a way of doing, it is an option. Another guy was saying what he does is, if you order from Amazon, a few sets of socks and underwear and stuff, and he simply has in his car at any given moment a little bag. He says, you don't have to go too far. You can go up exit 5, 6, 7 and encounter this. And this is what he does, because I think he must work in Stamford. But he'll have a little bag in the driver's side door with maybe a pair of socks and a granola bar or something like that. He says, a lot of the times these people, they get clothes, they may never wash those clothes ever. They just wear them until they fall off, and then hopefully somebody gives them something better. And they're very appreciative of something like a fresh pair of socks. You're at the red light, that's something that's very doable. It's probably only going to be a couple times a month that the opportunity arises, that the timing and everything works out. That's something very doable. I know if you want to get radical, I know a guy, another Texan, for some reason my homilies always involve Texans, I don't really know that many, but this guy, again, his kids are grown up, he lives in a reasonably well-to-do neighborhood, it's not like a gated community or anything where people would freak out, but he created, in his house, he has what is called the Jesus room. And the Jesus room is for whichever the hard up person is out there, he says, that person is Jesus. Whatever you did to the least of my brothers and sisters, you did to me. And the Jesus room is a section of his house, now that his kids are moved out, that he basically parceled out and said, and he does some selecting, and he will sit down and explain to them house rules, and he's a fairly big fellow anyway, but he says, look, these are the rules. You have to be inside by such and such a time. You respect my wife. Obviously, if anything shows up missing, you're out of here. Lays down some ground rules and everything, but he gives them a room in his own house. And he can share meals with them, and he has a shower and everything. And basically spends, he can be there for a couple of months, trying to get him on his feet again until he can get a job and kind of get going. This guy happens to be a deacon in the Catholic Church, and he specializes working with prison ministry and stuff, so he knows a lot of these fellows. Yeah, does he have to do some vetting? Sure. And frankly, has he stopped doing it eventually because after a while his wife said enough is enough? Yeah, actually that is true. But the long and short of it is, here's somebody who did something radical. Now, do I think probably anybody in this church that I'm looking at can set up a Jesus room? Probably not. But the point is, Christ is looking at each one of us and saying, I want to challenge you to a change of mentality. It's not so much the specific action that we do. It's more a matter of a mentality. It is when God's charity rules in our hearts, we will look at the world in a different way. And each one of us has our circumstances. God is not saying don't be prudent. Each one of us knows what is safe and reasonable and prudent, but also on the other hand, what can we do that's going to stretch us a little bit? And if we have that mentality, then we will be living the gospel. If we have that mentality, we will in our own ways change the world. There are things that each of us can do to get out of our comfort zone, to touch the lives of others. And the reality is, if we're not at least doing something sometimes, then we're not living a very substantial part of the gospel. And the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit